So, if you've ever tried to use an online betting app in the US, you've probably hit this weird invisible wall. One minute, everything's working fine, and the next, it's just dead. Well, that's not a glitch. It's a super complicated legal puzzle. And today, we're going to put all the pieces together.
It's a crazy common experience, right? You're hanging out in a state like New Jersey, your betting app is working perfectly, but then you drive across the bridge into another state, and suddenly, poof, it's gone. That's not your phone messing up, that is happening on purpose. And the reason why it all happens comes down to one single massive event.
So, how did we get this digital mess of different rules? Well, believe it or not, it all boils down to one landmark Supreme Court decision that completely redrew the map for sports betting in America.
Check out this timeline. It's pretty dramatic. For over 25 years, this federal law called PASPA basically put a nationwide freeze on sports betting. But then in 2018, the Supreme Court came in and didn't legalize betting everywhere. No, they just blew up that federal ban. They essentially tossed the ball back to the states, which is what created the 50 different realities we're living in today.
Just to be super clear, PASPA was this giant federal roadblock. Getting rid of it is the single most important event in this entire story because it instantly turned sports betting from a federal issue into a 50-state free-for-all. This one moment is the origin of all the confusion and, honestly, all the opportunity in the market today. And this is the part you really gotta get. The court's decision was all about states' rights. It empowered each state government to make their own laws, set their own tax rates, and decide who gets a license to operate. It was a massive transfer of power, not some blanket legalization. That one distinction explains absolutely everything that happened next. So what happens when you give 50 different states the power to write their own rules? Well, a few years down the line, the result is exactly what you'd think. A complicated, kind of messy patchwork map of laws. You can basically sort the entire country into three big buckets. First, you've got this tiny group of states that have gone all in. They've legalized both online sports betting and online casinos. Then there's a much bigger group that said yes to sports betting, but heck no to online casinos. And finally, you have this huge chunk of the country where online betting is still super limited or just banned completely. And here they are, the 7 all-in states. It's a surprisingly small list, isn't it? This really shows you that even with the power to legalize whatever they want, most states have been way more cautious about online casinos than they have been about sportsbooks. You know, if you want a perfect example of what a fully mature market looks like, you just gotta look at New Jersey. They were way ahead of the curve. They legalized online casinos way back in 2013, so they were ready to roll the second sports betting got the green light in 2018. The result is this massive, super competitive market that a lot of other states are now watching very, very closely. Okay, so it sounds like total chaos, right? A different law in every state. But believe it or not, a set of common sense rules has started to bubble up to the surface. Turns out, states that do legalize betting want to make sure it's done safely and fairly, and that's led to some shared standards for the companies involved. So if you're using a legit legal app, these 4 things are absolutely non-negotiable for the company running it. First, they have to confirm you are who you say you are and that you're old enough to bet. Second, they have to use geolocation technology to prove you're physically inside that state. That's exactly why your app dies the second you cross the border. Third, they have to protect your money by keeping it in separate accounts. And finally, they have to give you the tools to gamble responsibly. So who's really in charge here? The state or the feds? Well, the answer is both. The states are like the local managers. They handle the day-to-day stuff, like deciding what's legal, handing out licenses, and setting taxes. The federal government steps in for the bigger picture issues, like making sure bets don't illegally cross state lines and regulating how money moves through the banking system. Okay, so that's the landscape today, but this whole market is moving at light speed. It's changing constantly. So what does the future hold? Where are we all heading from here? And this brings us to the million-dollar question facing the entire industry. After years of building this state-by-state patchwork quilt of laws, there's a growing debate about whether it's finally time to create a single national set of rules for everybody. And you better believe people have strong opinions on this. The big national betting companies would absolutely love a single rulebook. It would make everything so much simpler and cheaper for them. But the states and tribal governments are pushing back hard. They do not want to give up control over their own markets, and maybe more importantly, their tax revenue. This whole tension is at the heart of proposals you might hear about, like the Safe Bet Act. Now, while that big debate rages on in Washington, the state-by-state expansion just keeps going, but it's happening on two very different tracks. Sports betting, that's still on a path of steady growth as more states jump on board. But online casinos, man, that's a much slower, more cautious story. And then, of course, you have states like Utah and Hawaii, which are just fundamentally against gambling and are probably never, ever going to change. So this is where we'll leave it. The entire U.S. betting market is caught in this massive tug-of-war between two powerful forces, the push for simple national standards and the deep-seated American tradition of state control. Which one is going to win out? Well, the answer to that question is going to define the future of betting for millions of us. It's a puzzle that's still being put together, one complicated piece at a time.